All right. Hey, friends, it's Anu. I don't even feel like I need to give an introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. It's really, I think, what's been on the hearts of our entire country and really around the world right now. We thought coronavirus was a thing, and now we're just dealing with this whole nother level of brokenness in our world. And so, but I will just go ahead and mention this just to make sure we're just kind of on the same page. Less than a month ago, we learned about the tragic death of Ahmaud Arbery, and I'm sorry if I'm not saying his name right. And then just this past week, I mean, not even a month later, we're talking about another man, George Floyd, who was killed in Minneapolis. And I'll tell you, if I've been seeing one thing on social media, it's this, especially by my African-American friends who have been posting. The common thread I'm seeing is, let's talk about this. And so I know for me, and we've all heard the quote by Martin Luther King Jr. too, that says this, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I know as their friend, I didn't want to be one of those voices who was silent to this. And so that's why we're here tonight, is just to have a conversation. And so there's a lot of places we could go with this conversation, but I think my heart in this, and I feel like what God put on my heart for this, is just really to just talk to a couple of moms who are raising African-American sons and what that looks like today. And then also, how can we as a community, as their friends, just come in and say, hey, we're with you on this, we're supporting you. So that's just the plan for tonight. And so I want to just introduce the two sweet ladies that I have with me. So first of all, we have Debbie Cherien. So she is a nurse practitioner. She's married, mom of 4, including an adopted son, adopted African-American son named Timothy, who is now 7. And she's had him since he was 2 weeks old, right?
Yes.
All right. So Debbie and I have actually known each other since elementary school. So we've been friends for a really long time. Our friendship goes way back. So thanks for being on, Debbie.
Sure.
And then I've got Nicole, her career is a licensed specialist in school psychology. She is married and the mom of 2 boys, adorable boys who you post the funniest things about, Noah and Evan. And so Nicole and I met because we go to the same church and we actually served in the marriage ministry together. So that's how I've had the privilege of meeting her. And she's just really an active part of our community too at Whispers and Fringes. So thanks, Nicole, for being on this call.
Thank
Your
you.
input is just going to be, so both of you really, your input is going to be so valuable to this conversation. So thank you. So you know what, guys, I just want to go ahead and just dive right in. Let's just go there. Okay. All right. So Nicole, I'm going to start with you. So generally speaking, how would you say your race has impacted your life?
I mean, I think it's just kind of colored every aspect of who I am today and just my life growing up, right? So I think we've probably all had experiences where you are told by maybe a friend that, oh, I can play with you here, but you can't come to my house because my dad doesn't like Black people. Or being in high school and being told, do you really want to sign up for those AP classes? Those are kind of hard. Or being in college and being a college student and not really planning for a road trip and ending up having to stop in backwoods Texas and needing gas, right? And walking into the gas station and have all these people turn toward you and feeling like, I got to get gas and I got to get out of here quickly because I'm in backwoods Texas and I am not safe, right? So I feel like just without me having to open my mouth, I've just been impacted and had all of these experiences, a lot of negative ones, but I feel like it just kind of, if you just spin it and make it a positive and make it something to overcome and being able to prove people, I can take AP calculus, or whatever the case may be, right? So it's just kind of colored who I am. And there have been lots of obstacles along the way. But I think that just race in general has made me aware of how other people perceive me. Does that make sense? Or
Yes,
kind of answer your question?
absolutely. Yeah, it does. And just to hear you say that it goes as far back as elementary school, that's just kind of blowing my mind right now.
Yeah.
you know, just that it's impacted you in that, from that point. But yes, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So Debbie, so for you and I, obviously we're both Indian and we're both a minority, but now that you have an African American son, how has that influenced your thoughts about race?
You know, prior to our adopting Timothy, and even prior to us getting to the foster care system and having children of all races come to our home, you know, I never honestly had to deal with racism. To tell you the truth, Indians really didn't have to deal with it as much as African Americans do, not even close. So I really did, I thought I understood. But what I understood was what was going on in the news, but it never really affected me personally. But once we adopted Timothy, it hit home. I saw the stories on the news, the stories that I heard about hit so close to home, because now it was my son. And now it was someone that I loved and would give my life for, that would probably one day have to deal with this in an ugly manner. So it hit home after we adopted our son, and I realized how this could actually impact his life as well as ours.
Yeah. When you put the face of a person you love into these stories, it changes things.
Everything.
For sure. For sure.
Changes everything.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to talk to both of you about this. And Nicole, we'll go ahead and start with you on this question. So when you first heard about George Floyd, what was your initial thought?
Again, because like you said, it had just happened to Ahmad not even a month before. So initially I thought, this again, like this cannot be happening again. And so then, you know, I couldn't bring myself to watch the video in its entirety, but when I watched portions of it, my heart, like I just was crying, because here's a man who's clearly restrained, and the force was just unnecessary. And I just kept thinking, what do we need to change? Like, we've done the diversity training and the cultural training, and everyone's got to check that box for most jobs now, right? But clearly that is not enough. It's not working. And so my thought was, one, again, and two, I've got to do something now, because enough. It's already been enough. For years it's been enough, but I maybe have not done enough. And so I have to figure out, what is it that I'm going to do? And how do we get, and police, not all police officers. I've met lovely police officers, but there are a few that need to go. And so how do we make sure that we get these people out, the people that have this negative attitude and actions toward our African American men? How do we get those people out? How do we identify them? How do we get them out? And that was kind of initially where my brain started to go.
Yeah. Again was definitely the first word that came to my mind too, when I heard about it. What about you, Debbie? What was your initial thought?
You know, I'll be honest, the first thought that came to my mind was, that could be Timothy. That was the very first thought. And it just almost took my breath away, because again, when you put a face on a story, it's no longer it's them, it's now us. And and I've been thinking about it ever since, not just with him, but it really hit home with George and Ahmad, because it happened so recently. And before you could even breathe from the first case, the second case was already there. So that was my first thought. That could be my son, you know, away from my protection, out there, fleeing for his life, and nobody paying attention.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I know, and Nicole, I mentioned Timothy is 7. How old are Noah and Evan again?
Yeah, Noah is 10 and Evan is 5.
5, okay. So they're all obviously still very young. Are they aware of these crimes against men that look like them?
Noah is,
Okay.
and not often. Like we literally just had a conversation this week about it, and what started the conversation was the issue that happened in Central Park with Christian Cooper and the other lady, I think her name is Amy Cooper, who said, I'm going to call the cops and tell them that a Black man is threatening me. And so we had this conversation about, well, you know, and his question was, well, why would she say that? He's asking her to put a leash on her dog. And so that's how we had the conversation of, there is this thing that happens to Black men. And we don't know what her intentions were, you know, but I would surmise that her threatening to call the cops would mean that she wanted him arrested or harmed in some way, because she didn't feel like he had the right to ask her to leash her dog, you know, a simple thing like that. And so we've started to have those conversations because he's 10. And I think he can wrap his brain around that. And also because I've had to have conversations with him about, you know what, you can ride your bike on these streets because I can see you. And you can't ride where I can't see you. Well, I don't understand, you know, don't you trust me? Yeah, I trust you, but it's other people that I don't trust. And so we've had very difficult conversations recently, especially with us being in quarantine and shelter in place, and he's going crazy in the house, you know, so I want him to get out. I want him to ride, but there are some parameters that we have to put in place to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah.
And you know, and that is a frustrating thing for me. I don't want to instill fear in my child at all, but I also need to make sure he understands what's happening in the world around him and why he might be perceived as a threat or as someone who maybe doesn't belong in this neighborhood. So we've started to have those conversations.
And then, so you mentioned what his initial response is, but why? Then when you give him the explanation, then where does it settle with him? Or does it?
It doesn't, you know, he's still perplexed, you know.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so the rule, because he's a very rule governed child, you know, so the rule is your dog's supposed to be on the leash. Yes. And her dog wasn't on a leash. Correct. He asked her to put, like, I mean, we went step by step. And so why was she going to call the police? You know, and so just really trying to understand. And so then we start to talk about white privilege and what that looks like and what that means, and how some people's voice is received and how some people's stories are automatically going to be taken as truth, and his might not have been, and yours might not be as a Black boy. And so I need you to understand that. And so it is, you know, I can see the wheels turning, and he's like, you know, I don't really get that, you know, but it's a conversation that we've started and that we will continue to have.
Yeah. So what about you, Debbie? Does Timothy have any idea about what's been going on?
You know, no. Being that he's 7, I'm not ready for him to hear that right now. Right now, he lives in a world where as long as someone's nice to him, he's fine. You know, we go to a very diverse church, so he plays with kids of any color, doesn't make a difference to him. But I have definitely started thinking about it more and more, to the point where I've reached out to friends who have adopted African American children or who are African American themselves, and I want some advice and I need some advice on how to talk to him sensitively, but not, as Nicole said, not to put fear in him, but for him to be careful and for him to be aware that just because someone treats him differently doesn't mean all people are like that. And my biggest thing is, because there are so many good non-Black people out there, and I don't want him to lump things into one category when everybody's not like that, you know. But I have to, so the line is very fine on how I bring this up. So I don't even want to go into it until I talk to people who have been down that road and how they handled it. Because, you know, Nicole already knows because she's a psychologist, but children think in very concrete terms. It's black or white. There's no gray area for them. So when my Timothy sees injustice, when he sees someone get hurt because of somebody else, his initial reaction is, that's not fair. Why did they do that? He doesn't think anything else other than somebody got hurt and someone caused it. So it's a fine line on how I bring this up with him, because the last thing I want to do is for him to have a negative view of non-Black races, because that's not the reaction that we want them to have, because we live in a very diverse world, and it's not a godly reaction as well, you know. So no, as of now, he does know. He does not know.
Okay. Okay. Nicole, this is a question for you. What do you wish people understood better about being Black in America?
That is a hard question. How much time do we have on this call? There are so many things. I think one is that we are a diverse people. So being Black in Louisiana looks different than being Black in Texas, than being Black in Chicago. And our experiences are different, and our culture is different. We have a culture, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but when we were brought here as slaves, all of that was dispersed. And so our culture is kind of spread out all over the place. And so I feel like some people don't understand that we have a culture. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And I think the other thing is that being Black in America today is tiring, because we have to prove all the time. We're proving something all the time. We have to prove that we're nonviolent, or we have to prove that we're worthy to be here, or we have to prove that we're educated enough to have the job. So it's tiring. It's not exhausting, but I feel like it's tiring. But it's also a wonderful experience, because we have this culture of people who uplift each other and support each other and encourage each other. And I could be in the supermarket, and if something goes down, I feel like I could find another Black person and we would be okay, you know? I mean, so I feel like there's also a community that comes with all of the experiences that we've had together as a people. But it's a wonderful thing to be Black, but it's also tiring. And there's also part of us that I feel is broken, because the country has broken us. Wow, sorry. You know, but you know, so those I think are the things that I would say right off the top of my head. That we're not what you see on TV. We're so diverse and bigger and greater than what we're portrayed as. But I feel like the country has broken us, and they have not done what they need to do to rebuild us as a community and as a people, you know. So we came here, we built the country, and then we've got Jim Crow laws, and then we can't be educated the same way, and then there are all of these things that are in place to prevent us from being who we really could be. I feel like I went off on a tangent.
No, you didn't.
But
you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I would want people to know, and that what you're seeing today is the result of just grief and hurt, and that is really what's happening.
Yeah. You know what struck me about what you just said is being in a supermarket, and if something were to go down, that there would be another Black person. But it's like, no, it shouldn't have to be another Black person. It should just be another person is there to help you.
Sure.
I hate that we're there. That, you know what I mean? And we get it, because again, Debbie and I are minority. And so we understand the comfort that having another Indian person brings.
Yes.
So we totally get it. But it just makes me sad that that's the lens that you know, that we've come to, is that I hope there's another Black person or Indian person, so they'll kind of be there to have my back. It's like, man, we're all just people. We should just have each other's back if something goes down. You know?
Right. You know, and I remember growing up as a little girl, and we would be somewhere, and my mom would speak to a Black person, or speak to a Black male, or a Black female, and be like, well, do you know them? And she's like, no, but we stick together, like, and don't you forget that, right? You know, so and I feel like that's something that happens in many cultures, as you mentioned. You know, and I just feel like there's kind of this unwritten rule that we're going to protect each other wherever we are, and however we can. Not that we can't expect other people of different cultures to help us,
right?
But I think the gut is, let me make sure that I can find someone who's going to be with me, and who I can trust to help me if I need help in this situation. You know, and I feel like like that's a pretty common thing.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, even just in general social settings, I know for me, when I walk into a room, that's honestly one thing I do kind of just check out. I'm like, oh, I wonder if there are any other Indian people in this room.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just where your
Yeah,
mind goes.
kind of a natural, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So Debbie, with you, what would you say has been the Indian community's response to you about adopting a child of a different race?
So, adoption is different, and different scares people.
Mm-hmm.
Different forces people to think out of their comfort zone, which all of us, that's just the way we are. It really takes a shove. Sometimes God just has to shove us out of our comfort zone. And adoption is in general just different. And I think that's what scares people regarding Indians. I think that's what scares Indians about adoption in general, not necessarily about a different race, but that's one issue. But definitely adoption, then you have, okay, so you're going to adopt, and they come to terms with that. But then, oh, wow, you're going to adopt someone that's not
Indian.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, what are you thinking? Because they don't understand it. They don't, because if someone doesn't look like them, that it makes them, they're forced to think differently. They don't know about that culture enough to feel comfortable with it. So they feel like, okay, you know what, if they adopt from a different race, then what's going to happen is, they'll hear, maybe they hear some negative stories about different races, and like they think that's what's going to happen to this child when they grow up, or they base it on what they know about the child's background, and they think, oh, they're going to be just like their parents. And so they put all these negative views into this adoption mindset, thinking that's exactly what's going to happen, not realizing that God has called us to love everybody, every child, no matter what the color is, no matter what their background is, because we're called to take care of the widows and orphans, as well as do our ministry. That God has a ministry for everyone, and not everyone's called to be, going to fostering and adoption, but everybody's got a job. And so I think that with the Indian community, I think what it is it's because it's different, that it's hard for people to understand that something that's different can also be something that's very, very good. And some people just aren't ready to go there yet. They're just not there because it scares them. So we don't always have the support that we'd like, but I will say with my generation, we've seen a tremendous amount of support. Almost everybody of my generation have definitely come alongside us and supported us, and here to help us, because it really does take a village. But I'm more talking about my parents' generation, because they didn't understand that at all. And when you go outside your biological family, you're getting into a very, in their mind, you're getting into a crazy world, a weird world, and it can be a little scary, because they're thinking, oh, well, my biological grandkids could be affected, or you know what I'm saying. So they're like, well, just let well enough alone. You're fine. You've got 2 kids. You've got 3 kids. Leave it alone. You don't need to go outside of that. You're fine. Take care of them, and you can send money to the orphanage, which is not a bad thing. That's awesome. That's
right.
It's needed. But sometimes God puts individuals to have a little bit deeper yearning to do something more than just that. That is definitely important. I'm not saying it's not, because there has to have that to have the orphanages running. But some people feel like, okay, God's calling me to do this. So
yeah, and God's definitely called you to do it. All those foster babies you've had in and out of your house.
I just love babies.
Okay, you guys, I just have a couple more questions these are for both of you. Debbie, so we'll start with you on this one. I want you to fill in the blank to this, okay? In regards to race, I feel frustrated or disrespected when?
The biggest answer to that question is when I see that, or I think that someone is judging Timothy based on his color or his background. because I'm very observant, so I can really, Nicole, you could probably tell too, right? You can see, in people's eyes or the way they look,
Yeah.
they're probably thinking something different. And I hate it. I hate it because it hurts me. And I'm just praying, Timothy, I hope you don't notice this. Thankfully he's in his own world. He's 7. But one day he will,
Right.
because he's also very observant. So that is my biggest thing. My biggest answer to that question is when someone is judging him based on his color or his background, knowing he came out of the foster care system, and then all, thoughts and questions. You don't know. You just don't know.
I think it's so interesting what you said. They don't even have to say a word.
Yeah.
You can see it, and you can sense it,
Yeah.
So what about you, Nicole? How would you answer that? In regards to race, I feel frustrated or disrespected when?
One of the things that bothers me is when I'm watching the news and something happens, and they say, well, it was a male suspect about 6'10". Well, I can almost guess that he's not a minority, because if he was a minority, it would be a male African American 6'10", or a male Hispanic American, or a male, So I feel like a lot of times, and that bothers me, because I feel like the media tries to portray African Americans in a certain light, and it's often not the best light. And so when I notice those little slight things, like, that bothers me. It frustrates me. And then I feel disrespected personally when I'm at a store or out and about, and someone looks at me and makes eye contact with me and doesn't say anything. Or when I'm in the store and I'm clearly looking for something, and an employee walks by and doesn't offer to help. Like, those things, I feel disrespected when I experience those things.
Okay. All right. And so here's kind of so much of this has been so important, but here's where I really, really need y'all's help too, is just knowing how we, as your friends, as the community around you, can come alongside you and be a support. What can we do? I mean, we can have all the conversations, we can do the walks, we can, be on the panels, and those are all really good things. But you, as my friend Debbie, you as my friend Nicole, what can I do? What can we do for you as moms, and just given just everything that's happening right now? Debbie, do you want to answer that first?
Sure. Like I said, being Indian growing up, I didn't really experience racism personally, because I just don't feel like we experience it. Our group does not experience it nowhere near the extent that African Americans and Hispanics experience it. And I was reading on Facebook recently, and someone wrote a post and said that whenever they have a conversation with somebody, the conversation usually goes like this, where she's mentioning, the writer of the Facebook post is saying, Black Lives Matter. And the person that she's talking to, if it's of a different race other than an African American, they're so quick, the other person is quick to say all lives matter. And the writer is saying, yes, of course, all lives matter, but Black lives are the ones that are not recognized as worthy of respect, value, or dignity as their non-Black friends. It's like, all we want for those of us who are experiencing this when it hits home is, don't be so quick to show that you think you understand. Because like I said, I didn't even understand until it hit home, until my son was Black. I thought I understood. So if you haven't experienced it to that level, what I would say is, when someone is talking Black Lives Matter or something along those lines, don't be so quick to come in and say, you know what, but all lives matter. Of course, we know that. That's common sense, right? So it doesn't need to be said, but truly, Black lives are not being respected or valued in this country in any way. And I would say, just acknowledge the fact that Black lives matter. Acknowledge.
Yeah. That's great, Debbie. What about you, Nicole?
Hi. Sorry, of course, my kids are at the door right now. Um,
That is okay.
I think for me, you know, I think it all starts at home and it all starts in our small circles. And so if you are a parent, I think it can start with going to the library and checking out books and making sure that those books have protagonists that are diverse, that the main characters look like African Americans or Asians or Hispanics or someone that looks different than you, right? And having those conversations about different cultures. And I can send you a list of books I knew too, you know, if you're interested.
Yeah.
And then I think also when people are in your circle at work or even at home, and you're having conversations, and if someone says something that has a negative racial undertone, I think you call it out. Call that out with love, you know, in a kind way. And you might say something like, you know, that has not been my experience with that group of people. Let me tell you a little bit about what I've experienced, you know. So just making it known that, you know, that comment is not an appropriate thing to say, because I feel like if you sit back and don't say anything, then you're complicit, right? And then I think also sometimes what we need to do is step back and challenge our own upbringing. Maybe we've been raised, or maybe we've heard people make disparaging comments about other people, and that might be lingering in our minds and in our hearts. And so I think we need to take a step back and look and see, do I feel that way, or have I ever thought that way about that person? And then compassion is empathy with action, right? And we see that in the Bible over and over. And the story that I read today about the Good Samaritan, and how all the, you know, the priest walks by and all these people walk by, and you have a Samaritan, you know, who stops and helps. He doesn't walk by and say, oh, I'm really sad that that's happening to you. But he says, I'm really sad that that's you know, that has happened. Let me help you with your wounds. Let me put you in a hotel. Let me get you going again. And so I think that's what you're asking, Anu, is what is that action part? And so I think that when we see injustices done, we speak on those things. There are some agencies that focus on criminal justice and things like that, and you can write letters to your governor and the legislators, you know. But I think what has happened previously is people can write letters to the legislator to have things changed, to have laws changed, or to have things reevaluated and reassessed. And so there's a website, and I just forgot about it, but I can email that to you as well.
Sure.
You know, but that would be something to kind of keep your eyes open for and check and see how you can support the laws changing, because really I think a lot of what needs to change is going to come from the top down. But I think people need to hear our voices in order for those things to change. And so I think that those are the main things. And, you know, and if you're at a place where you can stop and take time to make sure, you know, there's lots of people that have mixed feelings about stopping to support someone who's been pulled over, right? But if you're in your car, and if you want to just stop and make sure that the other person who's been pulled over is okay, you know, I of course you want to make sure that you're okay first and at a safe distance, right? You know, but anything that you can do to support an injustice that you see happening in real time, even if it's just taking notice and being a witness, I think doing those things are really important as well.
Yeah, actually, I think I saw one of your posts about that. It was a hashtag stay with my son.
Yes.
I loved that. And I love that you made the point that, you know, we always want to be safe, but I can't imagine if it was one of my nephews that was pulled over, and to know that somebody else just pulled off to the side just to make sure that they were okay.
Right.
I mean, that just, you know, just means everything.
Right. Yeah.
So that's great. That's great advice, you guys. Thank you for sharing that. And just thank you for being a part of this conversation. I just wanted to end it with something that I read actually just the other day in John chapter 11. after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, there was this whole plot to kill him. And we know that Jesus would eventually die, but this was not his time to die. Mm-hmm. So there's this plot happening. And in verse 54 of John chapter 11, it said this: "For that reason, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but left there and went to basically a different district with his disciples." And I was thinking about that. And if we were to hear that story, if Jesus were walking the earth now, how would we respond to that? And I was thinking, I would be like, Jesus, you come to my house. You'll be safe here. Come stay with me. And I was thinking about that. Like, we can't do that with Jesus. We could, obviously, because he's not walking the earth right now, but we can do that with his children. We can be a safe place for all of his kids. If it just means a place where they can just vent and share and say, it's hard being Black in America right now. I'm tired. It could just mean that we just have these open conversations. Whatever that means of creating a safe place for his kids, then let's do that. Let's show his love to his children. So I think that was just kind of something that struck me when I read that. So anyway, thanks again to both of you for being on this call. I just so appreciate your transparency. And to everybody who's been watching, I think they've made this point, and we have to understand that it's good to do all the things, but the change is going to start here. Mm-hmm. So, we need to watch how we talk. We need to watch our perceptions and perspectives of people, and just make sure that we're seeing them through the way that God sees them, and communicating with them in love the way that Jesus would. So anyway, God bless you guys. God bless you, ladies. And you guys all have a good night.